Well, good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. Tonight's topic is going to be on Satan's rule and authority, mainly looking at uh, the several passages in the New Testament that talks about Satan being ruler of the world or implies that very idea. We're going to look at that and see, does Satan really, quote, rule the world? Does he have this great influence in which he can, basically call the shot, so to speak, on this planet? We're going to look at that and see what the scriptures have to say about that. Again, this is brought to you by the North Columbus Church of Christ, located in Columbus, Mississippi. Our website scrolling below me, that's northcolumbuschristians.com. And we also have a YouTube page, and so you can subscribe to that, please. And these very videos, which you're seeing here on Facebook, will be uploaded there. And also, I encourage comments, questions here while we're live on Facebook. And so, going straight into the lesson, I think that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about Satan. Notice the picture I have on the screen. I had a good time on Google trying to find a good image uh, of, quote, Satan. And I think there's, this is an example of one of the misconceptions about Satan, that people have this idea that he's this red individual who carries a pitchfork and has horns, and the Bible never says anything of that manner. I don't think that he looks anything like what a lot of people or popular culture dictates a Satan being. And you hear people talk about, if they do something wrong, well, Satan made me do it, or they will talk about demons that they struggle with from time to time. And again, do people really understand what they're saying, or do they really believe that Satan is actually legitimately forcing them to do something? And we're going to talk about that very idea tonight. And going straight in to the lesson, when we look at scripture such as Matthew chapter 4, looking at the temptation of Jesus, I think we could come away with the idea that and rightly so, looking at the text, that Satan might have a lot of influence and has a lot of power and authority over the world. In verses 8 and 9, it says, "Again, the devil took him," that being Jesus, "up on an exceedingly high mountain, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and said to him, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." And just looking at this at face value, we would make the assumption that, well, if Satan is saying, "I'm going to give it to you," then he must have the power to give this to him. And this begs the question: is what Satan really saying? Is it true? Does Satan have rule over the world? Does he have power over the world? Is he kind of I get this picture of him kind of being the emperor or the king of the world. Is that the case? Was it just him lying about this? Was he just trying to get something to stick, so to speak, so that Jesus will fall to that temptation that he has been? And we know, if you read Matthew 4, that he has been tempting Jesus consistently for a little bit here. And this is one of those temptations. And so, again, was Satan saying the truth here? Was he lying? Can he do this? Does he have rule over the world here? And the answer to that question, I think it depends on your point of view. I think that, and we'll get into this later in the lesson, that looking at it in a certain sense, he might have rule or sway over the world here. And what he could say was, at least partially true in a certain point of view. You remember going back to Adam and Eve, how Satan tempted Adam and Eve, that there were things that he said that was, to a degree, it was true. He said that their eyes were going to be open. They would know right or wrong. Well, they did. But we know that he said it in such a way as to be deceiving. That this wasn't the full story, wasn't the whole story that Satan was giving them there. And so we want to ask the question, who's the real ruler? And we want to answer that question. Is it God or is it Satan? Who is the real ruler of the world? And we look at Ephesians 2 and verses 1 through 3. I'm going this very quickly here, but we notice in verses 1 through 3 that Satan is described as the prince of the power of the air, and that he works in the sons of disobedience. And then that is contrasted with believers, that they once were like this. They once walked according to the course of the world. They at one time conducted themselves in lust of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and the mind. They were children of wrath, that Paul says. But notice it says that they were walking according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. And so we see, again, this idea that Satan, and of course, him being named the prince of the power of the air, that he has some influence over the world. And just looking very quickly at how these words are defined, the prince of the power of the air, I think we understand what a prince means here, right? Similar to like a king or a queen, maybe not to that extent, but they do have some power and authority. And that word is used to describe authorities or rulers or magistrates or leaders in the scriptures. We also say prince of the power. The power here again is reference to this authority here. And so I don't think we know all the ins and outs here of this realm that Satan is in control of or has control of, but we do know that he has some power and some influence in a certain realm, and he definitely has influence over people. All right, that there's many people that are walking according to the prince of the power there. They're walking according to Satan here. And again, we see that the world is under the sway of the devil in Ephesians 2. And we see that the devil is working in what Paul calls the sons of disobedience. And we know what the sons of disobedience do. They just living according to their pleasures. They're indulging their lusts and desires. And again, we see that Christians once walked according to that, but they no longer do. They've overcome Satan. They no longer act in this manner. We see where Satan is described as a prince for the power of the air in Ephesians 2. We see multiple passages that he describes him as the ruler of this world. John 12 and verse 31, it says, now the ruler of this world will be cast out. So again, Jesus saying this, obviously talking about Satan here. The ruler of this world, that language is representing Satan here. But notice this ruler was going to be cast out. John 14 and verse 30, again, referencing the ruler of the world. For the ruler of this world is coming and he has nothing in me. This is in direct contrast. This is obviously not talking about God. He's talking about Satan here. He has nothing in me. This ruler is coming. And in chapter 16 and verse 11, the ruler of the world is judged. Again, and this is not going to be an exhaustive list of all the names of Satan, but again, he's talked about as being a god of this age as well. And so, again, we have this language that makes it, at least here, making it clear that he's ruling in some shape, form, or fashion the world. And we see that, but when we look at those descriptions of Satan, but we also see descriptions of God and him being a ruler, a creator, having complete and power over the world. In Psalms 135 and verse 6 says, whatever the Lord pleases, he does in heaven and in earth and the seas and in all deep places. All right. So whatever the Lord pleases, he does. Is Satan ever ascribed this power? No. We never see that. We see ways in which he is limited, which that God is not. Psalm 22 and verse 28, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he rules over the nations. Again, look at this, rules over the nations, and compare that with what is Satan is described as the ruler of this world. And start thinking about, well, what is the differences here? What makes Satan ruler of the world, and what makes God a ruler over the nations? Acts chapter 17 to verse 26, we see the scripture here, which God, it says that he's created man and he's determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. He's intimately involved in the affairs of men. He's created them. He knows what's going on. He's paying attention to what's going on as well. And so again, we see this description of God making it clear that he has a power over the world. He's created the world, a difference that we see between him and Satan. All right, and that he has created man. Hebrews 1 in verses 1 and 2, it says, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the Father by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. You see that passage, and those that may be watching and will watch, you might not understand this and maybe not have paid attention to this, but notice how Jesus is described here. It says, in these last days it is spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. Notice that Jesus played a part in the creation. It wasn't just God the Father here. Jesus played a part in creation. It says, through whom also he made the world. So through Jesus, he made the worlds. All right. A similar statement made in Colossians 1 in verses 15 and 18. It says, he, being Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things that he may have the preeminence. Who is the he or the him here? Is Jesus, all right? For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, all right? Again, he created these things. Jesus created these things. And all things were created through him and for him. He is before all things. Pay attention to that. He is before all things, and in him all things consist. Can we say the same thing about Satan? Obviously not. All right. He's never seen as being before all things. All things definitely don't consist in him. Again, all things were created by him. Satan hasn't created anything, but Jesus, again, created all things that are in heaven and that are on the earth. All right. So again, he created all things. He is before all things. Therefore, this is the case. Can Satan then legitimately rule the earth? And I'm saying this as he has complete power over the earth, that he's kind of he's calling the shots on earth. Can he legitimately do this? No, because we already see here, Jesus is before all things. God's created all things, all right? That means Satan does not have the authority or power that God has. He simply can't. He's lower than God is. And so the one thing that we can see is, okay, well, Satan can't legitimately rule the world, but again, we have to figure out why he's called the ruler of the world then, or why he's called the prince of the power of the air, or the God of this age. And I think what we have to understand here is that he can, quote, rule the world in a sense, but the rule here is not a legal or political rule. What he's doing is he's ruling in people's minds and hearts. Those that follow him, all right, and those that choose to follow him are under the rule of Satan. In John 8, in verses 54 through 56, it says, Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. Yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar like you, but I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Notice the conversation here. Jesus talking to the Jews, and he says, "You say that he is your God." God, the Father, the Father of Jesus, all right, the Son of God, okay. He's saying, you say that you know him, but you really don't, all right. Yet you have known him, yet you have not known him, but I know him, all right. So we see the contrast there. You say that he's your God, but you don't even really know him. You are a liar, all right. He said, calls them liars. And then he says, your father Abraham, all right. Notice that the Jews trace their lineage back to Abraham. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and it was glad. And so he's contrasted them. He's saying they may be saying, well, we have our father Abraham, we follow Abraham, we follow God. And Jesus is just trashing that idea, saying, no, you really don't. All right, you really don't know God. If you were like your father Abraham, if you had the same mindset as Abraham, you would be rejoicing when you see me, because he rejoiced to see my day. He was glad when he saw it. And so we see the contrast between those of old and the Jews there in that present day. In John 8, verse 44, just a few verses above what we just read, talking to the same people, he says, you are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. Notice what we see again, the Jews saying, well, our father is God, our father is Abraham, we're from Abraham. Notice what Jesus says, you are of your father, the devil. All right. Did the devil actually father them? No. Okay. They don't physically come from Satan, but why was their father Satan then? It was because the desires of their father they want to do. All right. So they were following Satan. They were doing the same things that Satan was doing. All right. And so that made Satan their father. Okay. Again, similar to, you start thinking about this idea of being a ruler of these individuals. All right. Or being a god of these individuals. They're following him. All right. They're in lockstep with him. They have the same mindset as Satan. John 8, verse 42 says, Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God, nor have I come of myself, but he sent me again. If God were your father, and again, we're talking about, I think what we're talking about here is you're lockstep with God. You have the same mindset. You have the same desires as God. You would love me. All right. But you don't. Okay. And so therefore you are of your father, the devil. You will not accept me. You do not accept that I proceeded forth and came from God. All right. And so he came from God. And so if you deny Jesus, guess what? You're denying God as well. Kind of goes along with this idea of that the only way somebody can come to God is through Jesus. All right. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. All right. So when you think about all of these other different religions, think about Islam, think about Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever it may be, think about these passages. They don't accept Jesus. They don't accept Jesus being the Son of God. Jesus himself said, if you don't accept me, God's not your father. He was telling the Jews that, all right? And it still would apply to us today. You're not following God if you're not accepting me and who I am and me being the Son of God. So therefore, if again, Islam, you can't deny Jesus being the Son of God and still be in good standing with God the Father. It just does not happen. It is not possible. And I wanted to look at Romans chapter 4, and I want to make y'all understand that this idea of their people's fathers being the ones that that they're following so to speak, they have the same desires as those individuals. That this is not just an isolated idea. Back in John chapter 8, Paul talks about this in reference to Abraham and the Gentiles, Gentile believers in Romans chapter 4. It says, "And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while still uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all those who believe. Though they are uncircumcised, that righteousness might be imputed to them also, and the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but also who walks in the steps of the faith which our father Abraham had while still uncircumcised." And so Paul is contrasting the law, and he's basically saying you don't have to be a good Jew to be a Christian. He's tearing apart this idea that the law has the power to save, and that what really mattered here was that they believed, that they had faith, and that faith was what was going to save them. And he contrasts that, saying, "Hey, Abraham was already deemed righteous before circumcision," which is basically the Jews saying they had, now at that time they had to be circumcised in order to be seen as, good Jew, that it was required of them by the law. And so he said, Abraham was righteous before all of this. All right. And why was that so? He said that he might be the father of all those who believe. Notice what he says, all those who believe, not just the Jew, but also the Gentile here. At the very end, it says, the father of circumcision to those who are not only of the circumcision. All right. So he's the father to not just the Jews, but who also walk in the steps of the faith which our father Abraham had while still uncircumcised. That's the key. If you have the same type of faith that Abraham had, if you walk in the steps of faith, guess what? You're going to be considered righteous just like he is. And also, guess what? He's your father, not physically, all right? But again, just like the Jews, their father was the devil, those that follow Abraham in the sense that they have that same type of faith, they have the same desires, he is their father. They have the promises given to them. Why? Because of their faith. And so, in conclusion, here, going back to this idea of Satan being the ruler of the world, looking at, does he legitimately rule the world? Could Satan have really given Jesus the kingdoms of the world? Not really, not legitimately. Okay, we understand that God is the one who's really in control of the world. He has power and authority and sovereignty over the world. But you think about this for a minute, that he does rule in the minds of hearts and minds of man, that he definitely sways people to go against God, to live according to their own desires of flesh. That's the majority, the vast majority in this world. And you think about if theoretically Jesus said, okay, I will bow down and worship you. Even though Satan couldn't legitimately say, okay, now you're emperor of the world or whatever it may be, he definitely could have worked to make Jesus become more popular among men. He definitely could have done that. We see that indulging in those fleshy desires, just doing whatever you want to, is very popular among men. And if Jesus would advocate for that, he would become a very popular among men as well. And so Satan could have influenced these people greatly to make the world love Jesus more. But we see in reality that the world hated Jesus. And so again, what Satan told Jesus was, well, in a way, it was true. There were some partial truths here. But he's trying to deceive Jesus. That was his real goal. He was going to say anything that he could put together to try to get Jesus to be tempted and to basically give in to those temptations as well. And again, similar idea with how Satan tempted Adam and Eve. And so I wanted to end this by, okay, we see that Satan has great influence over the world, and we contrast that with Jesus and God's rule over the world. But what can Satan do for you? That's the way I want to end this lesson. What could he do for you? Could he give you good things? We see Satan acting like he was going to give Jesus a lot of good things if he bowed down and worshiped him. Would he do the same for you? Well, what we do know is that he can give you an easy life if you follow him. And I want to contrast uh, the life of a Christian that we see in these passages I have on the screen. I want to contrast that with basically what would happen if you follow Satan, if you just lived according to the course of the world. 2 Timothy 3, verse 12 says that all that live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. So if you're following Jesus, you're suffering persecution in one form or another at some point in time. And so if you want to live a life that's, you're free from persecution, more likely there's not going to be a whole lot of people mad at you all the time. Well, you follow Satan, because if you're going to be living according to the course of the world, people are going to like it. They're not going to say anything. You will not be offensive to the world. And in 1 Peter 4 and verse 4, it talks about that a Christian, people are going to think it's strange that they don't run the same flood dissipation as them, that they don't do the same things. They restrain themselves, all right? And so in regards to that, you won't have the same struggles. A Christian may have to deal with peer pressure and hold strong in the midst of all that. Well, if you're living according to Satan, well, you're just going to do whatever you want to anyway. You don't have no reason to restrain self. You just indulge those pleasures and desires all that you want. All right. So you can live a life of partying. You can drink all the time. You can have all all that garbage that you want. All right. And it's going to be pretty easy, and it's going to be pretty pleasurable for that time. You can have all the riches and wealth you may need. You look around in this world, especially in this country, that if you're willing to be a little crooked, willing to bend the rules a little bit, it's a whole lot easier for you to become extremely wealthy, extremely rich. All right. If you're willing to do favors for individuals, you're going to get a lot of money for that. And so, easier for you to become wealthy and rich if you don't have any type of moral standard at all. All right. And so if you put that all together, it's a pretty good chance that you're going to have a pretty easy life if you're following Satan, especially in this day and time. That there's not going to be just a whole lot of people that oppose you for what you stand for. But what is it going to cost you? And it's going to cost you everything. It's going to cost you eternity if you follow Satan. If you say, I want to live a life of ease now, it's going to cost you an eternity. In Luke chapter 16, story about Lazarus and the rich man, we see that the rich man, during his time on the earth, he had a good time, that he lived a life of ease. He had plenty of stuff. Lazarus was not the case. He suffered tremendously. And we see when they die, the roles are reversed. Lazarus is in paradise. He's comforted, whereas the rich man is tormented so much that he wanted Lazarus to come and dip his finger in water just to cool his tongue. So think about this for a minute. He was tormented so much that he was just calling out, just begging, saying, if he could just touch his tongue with the tip of his finger, with the cool water on the tip of his finger, I'm talking about a millisecond of relief on his tongue. That's what he wanted. He just wanted just a little bit. But notice he was not going to get anything. He was not going to get any type of relief. And why? Because, well, he lived a life of ease. He didn't follow God. That's the reality. And we see Lazarus, apparently he was a faithful individual. The rich man was not. All right. And so the roles reversed. The tables have turned on these individuals. And so you really have to choose what do you want. Not saying that Christians can't have wealth and can't do things that are fun and all that stuff, but if you're really going to live for God, you're going to suffer some type of hardship eventually. There's going to be things which you have to grow a backbone and stand up to. And it may cost you. It may cost you a job, cost you some money, cost you friends and family. But again, what is the reward? It's eternity. It's eternal life, eternal in paradise, the eternal ease. All right. You never have to deal with those types of hardships ever again when you are in paradise, when you are in heaven. So, which one are you going to choose? All right. Hopefully, you make the right decision, that you serve God. If there's any way we can help you with that, leave a comment, message us on Facebook. We love to help you in any way that we can. Also, this is the end of my lesson, and so we're going to be putting this up on YouTube. If you want to, if for whatever reason you need to watch this again, this will be on YouTube. And I believe it's just easier to access on YouTube once it's already been recorded. Leave a question or comment if you need. And again, I try to. Seems like I miss a week occasionally here for the time being, but I try to put these videos up every week on Facebook, at least every 2 weeks on Facebook. And so, Lord willing, we'll keep on doing that. And again, our website is NorthColumbusChristians.com. You find out more about the church, North Columbus Church of Christ there. And we meet Sundays, 9, 10, 11 a.m., and on Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. And we definitely would love to have visitors. We certainly welcome anybody who would like to come. But until next time, I hope that you all have a good night. Thanks.